Before or during council's consideration of that item, please enter your name in the electronic kiosk located in the lobby. The city council will allocate up to a maximum of 3 minutes per speaker for each agenda item. Staff reports are available online at the city's website, cityofreading.gov, or in the public view binder located on the platform or the podium at the north side of the chambers. All right, should we have roll call?
Councilmember Adet,
Here.
Danuka absent at the moment. Resner,
Present.
Latar,
Here.
Mayor Mans.
Here. Thank you. All right. So we can consider item 3.1. Mr. Tippin, take it away.
And I actually have a voice today compared to the
Nice.
6th. So unfortunately for you, I probably will talk more.
Talk as long as you want.
Yeah. So this item 3.1 is really a carryover from our meeting on May 6th. And because of that, I'm going to be pretty brief on my presentation so the council can have ample time to discuss and debate. I will do a bit of housekeeping. As the council knows, we have a meeting, closed session starting at 5:15 this afternoon, followed by a 6 o'clock council meeting. That's a pretty busy agenda. And so just from a timekeeping perspective, you might want to try to shoot for 4:15 or 4:30 at the latest, so you have a brief break and maybe grab a bite to eat or something like that. So of course, that's at your discretion, but just a suggestion, should you want to have a little break in between those meetings. So in summary, at the last meeting, council had listened to a presentation that was reportedly going to be about 40 minutes. I think it was about an hour 20 or something. It was a long one, where we went through in detail all the internal service funds and the general fund departments and presented a budget for you. And I got to turn on my video source. And that is represented by the slide that's up on the screen. So that budget that was recommended had expenses and revenues that would result in the $2 million surplus year one and about $230,000 in year two. The council had discussed and decided that they would like to lower the revenue projections for year one, which would be 25-26, and year two from 2.5% to 2% in each of those years, and then project that further out. So staff made those adjustments, and that's in the slide that's behind me right now. That results in a surplus in year one of about 1.9 million and about 61,000 in the second year. I will note that because of additional changes that we made, which was lowering the starting cash, which right now we would estimate to be about 9 million, we made some additional changes, and I noted those in the staff report. One of those changes is, as the council knows, we have about 4 police officers today that are being funded by ARPA money. That's American Rescue Plan Act funding. And you need to look at that in terms of we're just funding RPD with funding in the amount of about 4 officers. It's not like we have this position or this position. It's just we're funding them in that amount. That money goes away and is fully exhausted by December of 26. And so staff is recommending that we remove those from the budget starting January of 27. And additionally, we reduced some capital expenses within the police department, being radios and some servers. We need those, but we can space those out a little bit as we move through the next few years. And we also reduced some capital expenditures within the Parks Department. The sum total of that results in the numbers that I just shared with you a minute ago in fiscal year 26 and 27. Both of those years are balanced and have a bit of surplus. And I think that's important because as we move on to the 10-year plan, you'll note that while we maintain $10 million in cash or more over each of the years, we do have a lowering of the reserve percentage at the lowest point about 5 years out at 8.8%. First year is 10.1%, then about 9.8%, and those would be your budget years. And then on out, 9.2 and 9%, 8.8 and 9 would be your first 6 years. one of the cautions that I have in the staff report is to make sure you're considering those out years for what they are, which is just projections. It's not only projected revenues, as we've talked about quite a bit, but it's also just projected expenses between now and then. And so if you're desirous of making changes today to have 10% in the future years, you have to consider those service level impacts that you would be introducing today and whether that's worth a projection of unknown amounts in the future. So my recommendation, of course, as noted in the staff report, is that we have balanced budget that we presented you for both years 26 and 27. While the 10-year plan has some dips in the 10%, I think it's a acceptable level. When we adopted the 10% in 2019, which increased from 5% to 10% as a reserve amount required, we noted that what that does is allow us to have some of these times in budget years where we would dip below the 10% and move it back up through the management of that 10-year plan to a 10%. Prior to that, it was a 5%, and we always considered that to be an absolute floor. In other words, you could never go below the 5%. It just wasn't sufficient for that. But with a $10 million cushion in the reserve as a 10%, I think it's probably acceptable to manage that as we move out to the future. And obviously, when we get closer to year 3, we want that to be a 10% for sure in the adoption of the next budget cycle. There's a lot of other good information within the staff report that I won't spend a lot of time going over. But if you do want to make some additional modifications, I have a number of bullet points that I suggested you think about as you would contemplate those. And as we move through, I'm happy to go through any and all of those with you. But for the moment, my recommendation would be for the council to consider and adopt the budget, the preliminary budget, because obviously the final adoption would be in June 17th, but that you would adopt this budget as a preliminary, and that would allow us to complete all of the work necessary between today and June 17th to get the budget all put together, the budget book. And clearly after this one presentation from me, you'll hear from the enterprise funds as well. Hopefully at the conclusion of the meeting, staff will be on their way to completing the full budget for your consideration on June 17th. And with that, I will close my comments and also mention that while Mr. Robinette is not gracing us with his presence up here, he certainly is available for questions.
Great. Thank you, sir. Anybody have any questions? Hello, Paul, how are you?
Thank you, just too much traffic.
No, you're welcome, welcome. We have, anybody wants to talk, or are we? Yep. Vice Mayor Littell.
Yeah, I have no questions. I just wanted to comment and say, I know you guys have worked really, really hard on this. The finance team and the city manager for a lot of months. It was not easy work. It was difficult. It's contentious at times, so thank you for working through that. I'm comfortable moving forward that, so I'll make a motion to approve the preliminary draft general fund and internal service fund budgets as written, so.
I'll second.
Okay. We have a first and a second.
I may have missed it, just the number on this expenses in 2025, it exactly is a precise number?
So the under fiscal year 25, that's a typo?
Yeah.
Yeah, so on the right-hand side, the fiscal year 2026 and 2027 are the correct numbers.
But what is the number for 2025? Okay, so I see
Oh,
it now.
hang on, yeah, previous,
I got it.
It's 100.
111,
yeah,
241.
111, 241, yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
All right. Well, we have a first and a second. All in favor?
I have a request to speak.
Oh, I don't see it. Sorry. Oh, there you go, yes. Go ahead.
So I know that the council voted not to have another budget meeting. So when that was actually scheduled, I was hoping to get the report that I had asked for in the last budget meeting, but I didn't. I got 7 reports that are not the one report, but it is 7 reports. I got it last night at 4 p.m. So I've been trying to go through that and to see if they're all different reports. I would think that collectively, maybe that would get us to some of the information that I was looking for to make a good decision as to if the projections are consistent with the trends and what we believe is really going to happen as far as what revenues we're going to take in, And then also if the expenditures that we had discussed in January and March were the best representation of, are those all the places where we should be cutting or could be cutting? That was obviously very difficult to get most of that information as well. So the 7 reports that I got, I don't know if you've made those available to the public, because these 7 reports came in an email at 4 o'clock. It was not with our agenda packet. Have they been made available to the public?
They have not. They weren't considered part of your budget packet for tonight, so they were not made available. But certainly if the council wishes us to put it up on the website, we certainly can.
Well, typically in our staff reports, which we've gotten up and until September of 2023, we would, the public within all of our mid-cycle and mid-year reports would get the actuals, so the actual expenditures, actual revenues. The public is not aware of that either. They've not gotten those reports. And so I asked for that report in the last meeting, and I got these 7 instead of that 1 report. I got 7 reports, and so I would think that the public should be available to the public as well. So I would request that.
Yeah, we're happy to post those up on the
Okay.
website.
Maybe they can make sense of
Yeah,
it.
and just for clarity, I believe it's the last set of charts on that is the attempt to match that last report that we used to produce. Just for everybody's benefit, that report was out of our old financial system, the AS400. The current system does not produce that report, and so the finance department is working through the new system to try to develop that report in the future for the council's review. In lieu of that, in the staff reports that we produce on a quarterly basis, they have expenditures, albeit at a more macro level for each of the big funds, police and fire, et cetera. And so as we move forward, we certainly will try to refine that for the council's consideration to your desires.
Yeah, so at least if the public can have whatever these reports are, I think that would be important. And then part of the email that we got with those 7 reports said that it was possible to work with the vendor to actually get to replicate the report, the cash flow reports and the expenditure reports compared to budget that include the encumbrances so that we understand what was budgeted, what was spent, how many of those things are encumbered through grants that are still, so that we know what the rollover is going to be, so we just have a better idea of what we spent, what we still need to spend, what was budgeted but not spent, and, and how we're moving along through the budget cycle. So if that is, well, we need to make a motion, either
No.
another item to ask that,
No.
he said if we wanted to have that through
Yeah,
the vendor,
staff,
we could.
what I would recommend is let staff attempt to create that because that's spent cost. In other words, it's staff that's pulling that together. If we rely on the consultant, it's a change order and it's cost, and so it's extra expenditures. And so what I would recommend is that you allow staff to try to develop that report with the tools that we have. And if we're unsuccessful in satisfying the council with the financial reporting, then we certainly can engage the consultant and have them work on it for you.
Yeah, it's been almost 2 years, so I would like that to be a priority because in order to make sound fiscal decisions, I do think that we need to be able to check the work, to look and to see if what's being said is represented in the numbers and in the reports that have been provided. And so I think the public would like to see that as well because all of these reports have been made available to the public at each of those
Does she
quarterly
need a
reports.
majority of us to agree with that, or just
Yeah,
something
well,
that she can recommend on her own? How does that work?
Staff has every intention of continuing to build better financial reporting out of the new system. While we have gone live 2 years ago with that system, I think it's unfair to say that staff should have been doing that immediately because we also went live immediately thereafter with our time management system, and then we went live with our budgeting system. Meanwhile, we're working on our contracting system, so we're changing over our entire financial system for the entire city of Reading. And so while we would have loved to be able to have the staff time and resources to do all of that, we haven't been, and we didn't bring on extra staff to do all this. We did it all in-house while we did budgets, while we did audits, and while we did payroll and everything else. And so, I understand and appreciate the frustration, but staff has been working hard to do all this. And we certainly are dedicated to continuing to improve financial reporting and providing the council in particular everything they need to make good fiscal decisions. That is our goal, and we'll continue to strive for that.
Thank you. All right.
Well, so I'm sure that you've all made a great effort, but in order to make good, sound financial decisions, these are the numbers that you all have that you use to actually project and to fill out your audit. So somebody has this information. It's just not being put out to
Well, that
us.
last page is actually in the audit book. I believe it's like page 142, and it's in there
Yes.
every year.
Yes,
And so we use that amongst many other things, and we've presented financial reports to the council every 3 months for the last 2 years. And it's only been in the recent few months that we've had complaints about that report. And so we're dedicated to try to work on that and improve it for the council's behalf.
so this report, these 4 reports that usually come with the mid-cycle, the mid-year, and sometimes even with the quarterly reports, have not been included since September of '23.
That's correct.
I'm not making that up.
That's correct.
That
This-
is reality.
What you're referring to that we sent to you last night actually took Mr. Robinette probably 8 hours to put together all of that information and bring it into a concise form for you. And so it's not just push a button and the report comes out. And so we're attempting to give you everything you need. We've heard your concerns and the desires that you have, and we'll continue to try to work on that financial reporting for you.
So, just to be clear, it took him 8 hours to do the 7 reports, but the 1 report I'm asking for still has not been produced.
One of those reports that we sent you last night is an first attempt at that report that you're referring to that came out of the old financial system. We will continue to try to replicate that. We have not been able to perfectly do it as of yet.
Sure. So I don't need perfection, but I do want actuals. I mean, that's really what I've been looking for.
And again, we provide actuals on a more macro basis.
Right.
That one is much more detailed that we were able to produce out of the S400. Every financial report that we provided you up to this point would have a macro level. In other words, actuals versus budget on police, parks, fire, et cetera. It's not as detailed, but that's been produced in your staff report at every quarterly financials that we've had. You know, we're clearly happy to provide more detail as we move forward and work on those financial reportings for you.
Sure. And so when trying to figure out because we haven't been given actuals for 2020 fiscal year ending in '24, and we haven't been given the quarterly reports, these reports in this fiscal year, when
Well,
we're trying to
You were given a
decide.
different format. Again, the actuals for the departments were provided in the body of the staff reports. It may not be exactly the data, it's the more macro data. It's not all
Sure.
busted down to O&M versus personnel. It's more
Correct,
macro.
so,
That's
right,
correct.
so, exactly. So when we're trying to look for places, listen, if our budget was great, then we wouldn't have to go into the details. But when the budget is at a deficit and we have issues with money, then and you're making suggestions about where to cut, and we don't have all that information to be able to see, is that the only place to cut? Can we ask questions about other things? Can we search for other places? Then if you don't actually have those details, it's very difficult to figure that out. And when you're offering certain things, but not all the things, and tasking us to go find different places, and I've been asked several times, well, where do you want to cut? Well, where do you want to cut? Well, I actually don't have any of those details to be able to figure that out. And so in searching for all of those things, that's what I'm looking for. So yes, maybe throughout the year you don't need to have those details, but when it comes to start to make a budget and we have a discrepancy on where we think that we could possibly cut, in order to be informed and to make a great decision, I need as many data points as possible, and actuals are a big part of that. So the large, big picture, it's this big number, doesn't actually help when you're trying to figure out, is it going to be more sworn officers? Is it going to be CSOs? Is it going to be operating expenses? And to see who's over that budget and to see where we're over that budget and why are we over that budget? These are all the great questions that we should be asking, that the public wants us to ask. The public wants us to make informed decisions. And I'm just saying that the amount of information that you have provided does not afford me the ability to make an informed decision. That is the message. And so this.
We hear you, and we are going to call for a vote. We have a first and a second. So you want to do a roll call, or you want to do just all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
While everybody's voting, can I just give a little bit of context? After it was said during last meeting, essentially that the swap over of systems was taking too long, I did a little bit of Googling of what it would take in the private sector to move over from, and I'm not an analyst, but to move over from, say, a green screen to a system that is much more modern, like Oracle, for this size of a entity. And on average, it said it should take us roughly 3 years. In the private sector, we would have hired someone
Right.
specifically for this job, but we have limited resources and limited financing. So I just want to give some context when we are like, I need this faster, that I do think that those are naturally going to look different of what it used to look like. I'm not sure in 1992 than it does in 2025. I think that those are going to look differently, but I am impressed with what we've been able to get and what is provided to us each time. I actually felt like it was really helpful, the email that came in last night, and looking at that. I liked the way in which that it was worded, and I have been impressed that the finance department is where we're at, because if it would take the private sector 3 years, it probably should have taken us 5, because government typically works slower. That's it.
So, how much would it cost to to have a consultant actually provide, like, help set up getting this report to us?
I don't have that number right now.
Because in the audit, it is on page 142, and I asked specifically if that's the most clearest way to see what that is, and I was told no. So I'm super curious if 142 is the page, and that's what we should be able to see as far as actuals, that's your official statement is in the audit, page 142?
It's not my official statement. I was referring to that document. I think we're a little off target, but
Our budget is-
we'll continue to try to improve those financial reportings for the council, and do the best we can with the systems we have, and if and when we need to reach out for better reporting, we'll do so.
And we voted and we are moving on.
May I ask?
One second. I mean, it seems that some people's trust in you and others have evaporated. I just want to be on the record that I am clearly trusting you and believe in Greg Robinette and his staff, and others who have been, I don't know what the right word is, but I have met with everybody, even on this issue, as I talked about last time. I put my complete trust in you and what you've brought forth. Yes, maybe things are a little bit slow, but that's because you've clearly outlined that we're moving into a new system. Every time I meet with Greg and they complain about the system, but they're working hard. I mean, I don't know what else we can do. So I believe that we're doing the best we can with the right numbers, the right integrity, the right honesty, and I believe on the record. Paul.
So, I'm just trying to understand, Janessa. I see the concerns, and we're all looking for saving money somehow. And as I said before, what's more important for us is how to make the pie bigger rather than struggling over a piece of pie. So I would rather focus on how do we make the pie bigger, how do we grow our economy, how do we grow wealth in our city. My question is, I understand your concerns about the reporting system, and I do want to see that, okay, if we can have a better reporting system, great. But there are many ways of looking at financial reports. It doesn't have to be in a specific format to understand it. And we have looked at it in great details. What I would like to know from you is there something which you can say, hey, this is where we can really cut? Or this is something.
Our budget, we've passed the budget.
No, I understand that, but I
think I just articulated why I was not able to do that. I think I just articulated that, and in the last meeting, I asked for a workshop so we could actually work on that with actual numbers.
No.
And I've not gotten the actual numbers, and you guys said no to that type of workshop, and we only got this information. We literally got the packet delivered to us last night.
I understand
And we got
that.
the email last night. So it's really hard to make decisions and to discuss or to dive deeper into something when you're only given that information less than 24 hours before you have to make decisions.
And also, we don't have the opportunity to discuss these things outside this forum because of various restrictions on us. So that's why I want to have this conversation.
We're done.
No, I'm allowed to have a conversation here because I cannot.
We're voted.
No, I understand.
moving on.
Mayor, I still want to have a conversation which I'm not allowed to have outside this forum.
Well, after we voted,
No, I understand, but we still have the final
Christian.
budget. We still will have the final budget coming next month. So I do want to ask her that we still have 3-4 weeks left, and maybe in the next meetings or something, if you have some specific ideas that you can cut somewhere, I would appreciate seeing those things so that we can work more on that.
Yeah, me
That's all
too.
I wanted to say.
Well, my hope is that, I know, I can anticipate that the next time we come, we actually have to be given actuals. So we're gonna actually, if we get the binder and the budget, it will have in there what the actuals were for the previous years, so you know what you're voting on compared to the year before. So at some point, this report and its numbers have to get reported in the budget. So I'm hoping that in the 4 meetings that we have in June, that we can maybe work
We're
it
not
out. I
having
think
4 meetings in June.
We settled those meetings just in case we didn't get budgets here tonight. So
we're
we have 3 more presentations for you tonight. And also just for clarity, the budget book does not have actuals. It's your budget book. It's your expenditure plan and your estimated revenues. So what you will see on the 17th is just the budget.
So
expenditure
in the
plans.
previous budget, in like, let's say it's police, it had actuals for the prior years included with the
had-
projected
it
years. Are you
had-
saying it won't this time?
It had no, the budget books don't have that in there. We have the actuals on 24, 25 as best as we can, because it's not audited information, right? It's the best we can predict. And then it has the projected expenditures for 25-6 and 26-7.
So the budget that you're gonna give us in the, will also not have actuals from the year
It
before?
won't have the exact actuals because we haven't even closed the fiscal year when you
What about
adopt that
from
budget.
the year before?
Yeah, it'll have those as best as they were reported from the audit numbers, yes.
So we'll have some actuals in it?
Yeah, you've seen all those as well already, but yes, they'll be reproduced.
In the audit, we've seen those.
And you've seen those, and you've seen them also in other fiscal reportings. So
So when you
again,
say,
we're going to do our best to produce the information that you wish. We're really running around in circles, and we will continue to develop fiscal reporting for this council. And we're happy to chase down any and every information you want and produce it in the format that you wish, and we'll continue to do that.
Mr.
Yeah.
Robinette, are you starting up at 3.2?
No,
Who's beginning?
so I'm just trying to get actuals. I don't know why it's so difficult to get actuals.
Yeah.
In the form of by the budget. So I was under the impression, because the last budget book had actuals in it. So I thought at least by June, we would get the actuals, and maybe at that point, then, because I mean, this is the closest thing, but these are in the audit book, which I was told are not what I should be looking at. So if 142 is the page,
again,
and that's
those
the
are,
actual.
you're misinterpreting. What we told you is if you look at a budget adopted versus the actuals in the audit book, they do not match because there's carryovers and there's other things that happen in your actual expenditures that aren't a budget.
Correct.
So
And-
when you are looking at items, we're encouraging you to look at budgeted numbers to budgeted numbers, actual numbers to actual numbers, audited numbers to audited numbers. And so that's what we're trying to point out with the information that we've provided you. And on the quarterly reports, what we report is what we expected to spend to date and what has been spent to date. And those are provided every 3 months. And we do true-ups mid-cycle and mid-year of every budget. So again, we'll continue to develop the financial reports to try to satisfy the council's needs and desires.
Well, I just think that the public in general wants to know what we're budgeting and what we're actually spending on those things that were budgeted, and that is not clear.
Mr. Tippins,
not clear.
if you can provide those things well in advance to us, that'll be great.
They have
final budget.
and do,
Yeah,
which
we-
is
we
what
do,
he
and
is.
we'll
Well, he
continue
keeps
to do so.
reiterating.
I do not expect that every member of the community nor this council to be a financial expert. And so I do understand that it is difficult sometimes for it to seem simple, as accounting is difficult.
I don't think it has to, I think we just have to agree on which page we're gonna look at. I mean, you can pick whichever report you want. You can pick, of these 7, you could pick one of them and just say, this is the one we're all gonna agree on, that we're looking at, and that we're gonna judge on. Even if that is, you know, the snapshot from June, it's accrued, or it's cash, or whatever. Just pick one, and then let's go based on that. But asking for one piece of paper and being given 7 does not make it more clear. That makes it actually more confusing, and being given to it 24 hours, less than 24 hours before. So I've asked for clarity. This report is very, very clear. It tells you what your budget was, what your prior year appropriations were, what your current expenditures are, what your year-to-date, and the encumbrances, so that you know that that also has grant monies that are, you know, still attributed to that, so it's gonna roll over. So, I mean, I would say that the previous reports, even if you just went back, got something closer to how they previously used to report, where it had a summary, a mid-year summary for each of these categories, it also had the actual numbers for you to match to that, just made it more clear when you're trying to make those decisions. I would say that the amount of spending that's happened over the last 3 years makes us even more critical because it's hard to understand how we've spent that much money and where we are right now with our reserves. And so in trying to understand what happened, it would be good to have more data points. And these 7 pages that we just got yesterday don't make that very clear. I would love for that to be clear. I thought we were going to get a
You keep
presentation.
repeating the same thing over and over, and Barry keeps repeating the same thing over and over.
Right.
We have
that-
passed through this. You've said they're gonna post the things that you want post. They're gonna try to do their better job to bring everything up to date. We'll have
Well,
24
he asked
numbers.
me a question, I was
Okay.
answering, and I don't think that the public says, just trust without knowing. They want some backup to that trust, and I
We're
would like the
moving
backup.
on. Nick, are you up? Come on up. Consider presentation regarding the current budget development of the biennial budget for fiscal year ending 26, 27 for the enterprise funds.
Yeah, so we'll do REU, followed by Public Works, followed by the airport.
Right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council this afternoon. There's 2 good things. One, I dressed as good as Director Michael Webb. You'll notice that when he gets up after me. And when I was walking in, somebody gave me a very nice comment that there's no gray in my beard. So I'll take that, both of those.
Take
today.
it.
Seriously?
I'm serious. It happened.
All right,
Okay,
me neither.
come on. Come on. Is this acceptable? All right, it doesn't want to go forward. No, and I can't reach back there. Thank you, Steve. Okay, it's my pleasure today to walk through REU's budget here at the workshop for FY 26-27. Before I get started, I want to thank the REU finance team who's sitting in the audience and also the city finance team. It takes a lot to pull this together. Reading Electric's a big animal. We have a lot going on, from capital projects to the O&M to running the power plant to the people and the oil and rags and all the stuff that it takes to make this system stay on 24/7 as much as we all like it to. And I want to express my gratitude. I also want to mention that as we go through this slide deck today, if there's a question that I can't answer, my team will write that down and we'll give you, the entire council and any member of the public that wants it, will give a response prior to the next meeting in June. And also, if there's a question that you have after this, after you go through the material, you think of something, just please feel free to reach out at any time. As we look at developing our budget, we do it, let me click back one. We do it based on performance. So we initiated a strategic plan in 2021 through 2026. And we hold ourselves to 5 different categories on key performance, and each category has 2 KPIs. It's important that when we look at spending our customers' money, that they're getting something for their money from a performance basis, whether it's better reliability, talented personnel, safety, wildfire risk mitigation, customer satisfaction is important. So as we develop this, you'll see kind of thematically that we put the budget together based on our strategy. This is, I'm not going to go over all 9 of these goals, but this is where we started in 2021. We are kicking off a new strategic plan process for 27 forward because this system works well. It's helped us maintain rates. It's helped us meet the goals that we needed, whether it's capital projects or new software, new systems, being more efficient, whatever it takes. This last part of the budget for FY 26 and 27, which is actually going to span into the next strategic plan, we're really looking at the top 3 goals. Wildfire mitigation is just as important today as it ever was, if not more. The distribution system infrastructure, we're really getting ahead of steam and replacing that. You may have seen around town, we've had crews pulling out old underground cable. We're replacing poles. We're really getting out there and putting the money in the ground. And then our distribution modernization elements are also starting up, getting ready for kind of, I would say, the grid of the future. So in this budget, there's really 4 key pieces that I wanted to go over. Retail sales are increasing, which is good news for us, our city, and our utility, because as we sell more electricity at our retail rate, it provides the existing customers with additional revenue to offset future rate increases for them, right? So if we think about people buying an electric car, they were buying gasoline or diesel fuel. Now they're using our grid to charge. Instead of the money going to oil companies, it now comes to Reading Electric, to the city, And that revenue helps offset any future rate increases for the rest of the customers that may have not even bought an electric car. So retail sales growth is important. I'll get to a little bit more on how it helps. Power supply and wildfire mitigation costs are increasing. We're in California. California has goals and requirements for power to be clean and renewable. We'll see what that future holds a little bit with the federal administration, but nonetheless, California is pushing forward. And wildfire is an issue for our community. We know this. We live somewhere where we are smack dab at the wildland urban interface, and we have a lot of customers that are kind of out in those outskirts. And so in order to mitigate that fire, whether it's vegetation removal or future engineering solutions, both cost money. We are not requesting any new positions. We're always trying to fill the existing vacancies that we have. Maybe my team won't like this, but as you know, we understand the position of the general fund. We understand the position of the city. We are also requesting rate increases over the next 5 years. And so the answer for new positions, in my opinion, is work harder. So we'll just have to do more with what we have. Lastly, significant capital investment. We're playing catch up on the grid. For years, I'd say, borrowed from the system. We were having to spend money in other areas, and so we depreciated our distribution and transmission system a little bit further than we would like to. So now we need to get back out there and start replacing elements so we don't have reliability issues and failures. We're also looking at investing out in the power plant in a building. Our folks have been in some temporary trailers for 20 years. That's not temporary, so we're looking at a building. So let's jump into revenue. There's 4 primary drivers. Utility rates. We did have a rate increase effective January 1. That, of course, even if people didn't use any more electricity, if they use the same amount, there's going to be additional revenue coming in. Number 2, there's load growth. I mentioned that, whether it's electric vehicles, new construction. I mean, as we look around town, there's new buildings going up everywhere. Even if they have a solar and storage system on them, they still use more electricity than they will generate. There's some load reduction, of course. There's still some solar going on, still some energy efficiency out there, but we're really starting to see that flatten out. At this point, most appliances are going to be Energy Star. Most air conditioners are going to be very efficient. Any of our appliances are they're energy efficient. And a lot of the homes that were built in the boom in the 70s and 80s in Redding, those air conditioners have kind of finally died and they've been replaced with much more efficient units. Lastly, wholesale sales. It's important that we talk about how much do we budget for wholesale sales revenue that Redding Electric earns from selling power, gas to outside entities in the market. We only budget for that is under contract. Otherwise, we would be speculating of making sales out in the future and speculating that revenue would come in. And if we were to be wrong, let's say the sale didn't materialize or the market didn't happen, then we would have to turn around and use cash reserves, or if we were really wrong, maybe do an emergency rate increase. We don't want to do either one of those to our customers. So we will only budget wholesale sales that we've already locked up in a deal, so to speak. Now, there's upside there on revenue. If we have a good hot summer and we have extra capacity and we sell that power to the market, that's wholesale sales revenue that will come into Redding Electric, come into the bank account, and then offset the need for future rate increases, right? But it's important that we, kind of toe the line there and we don't speculate on that. Last, I think it's important when we talk about load growth. From the past 3 years, we've added 3,000 residents in Redding. The 10 years before that, total was about 1,000 people. So you're seeing what we use in our tools of econometrics and what we use to forecast what people are going to use. The metrics of the economy are showing a much higher net migration growth coming in, which means we have to, and our financial team and our resource planners have to plan for that in the future load forecast, because you can't build a power plant today, or you can't build more transmission distribution lines right now. These are 5-10-year projects, so we're constantly looking at the metrics of the economy, and the metrics of the economy are looking better for Redding, and they're looking better for more electricity usage. So jumping into revenue, this is our typical mix. For FY26, it's going to look pretty much the same for FY27. Retail on the left, half of our revenue comes from residential, and then I would say a larger mix from large commercial and then some from small commercial. If you look at wholesale, majority comes from natural gas sales, some from power, but as I mentioned, as we move forward into time and start making power deals on the wholesale market, we'll actually see some more of that revenue coming in. But we don't want to put that on here because we haven't done that yet. I think notably, our retail sales account for about 80% of our revenue over the 5-year plan, where wholesale sales make up the difference. Our load forecast, this is, I think it kind of going back to 10 years of not much really happening. Let's go to 2015. It starts to kind of dip down. You see a notable drop, and then it kind of hovers around, moves a little bit more, a little bit less. This is weather normalized. So what we do with our actual sales is we normalize it to heating degree and cooling degree days, so we can kind of take that, oh, well, it was a hot July, or it wasn't a very hot July. So we take that out of the equation and say, normalizing to weather, how are we doing with sales? Is this actually picking up, or is it actually going down? And you'll see in that forecast, we are adding sales growth at a healthy rate from electrification and from new development. And I do want to mention that I think we found the bottom here. You can see we were up in the 800,000+ range in 2011. With enough energy efficiency and solar systems coming online, it drove that down. And I think now we're starting to kind of see that we've maxed all that out, which is good. We want that. We want to be as efficient as we can, and as many customers get solar systems as they want to have. And now we are planning for growth in the future. Looking at expenditures by category, this is one way to look at it. We'll also look at it by function, but I think category is interesting. FY26 total expenditures, $192.8 million. 27 is $198.7 million. It's a 3% growth assumption. We've looked at inflationary rates based on what we're seeing in our world, in the electric world, for the things we have to buy. There's CPI, which is kind of what we use in our normal daily lives, our food, our clothing, of course, excluding fuel. I don't know why they do that, but they do. I know why they do it, but our world's more PPI, like producer price index. So when we go buy things, we're buying transformers and wire and power plant generators, and these are things that are a lot more subject to what's going on in the global economy, of tariffs, maybe not tariffs. And just as this has been introduced, I would say there's going to be an uptick in our pricing, just what if pricing, so to speak. So we're using a 3% inflationary rate because the majority of our expenditures are not personnel, they're power supply and capital related. So you have to really look at where do you see that growth coming from. As you can see, personnel is about 25% of our budget, which is very different. I think for council, it's been looking at general fund, which is probably more 70 to 80% of the budget. We're capital intensive. We're also very intensive on power supply. So as we look at personnel and personnel costs and the number of people that we have 25% of the budget trying to manage the other 75%. And it takes a very talented group of folks to make sure that these things stay in check. So I think expenditures by function is a different angle and a different look at where are we spending the money. We can see that resources, the big green one, that is actually power supply. So that's buying gas, buying power, paying for renewable energy, buying transmission, paying for transmission debt with our JPA, all the things it takes to get megawatt hours and kilowatt hours delivered to people in Reading. And then we have our distribution system, which is, we have over 700 miles of wires and poles and underground vaults and transformers and things. It's expensive. And, there's something always happening to it, and it's at various stages of life. Some of it's brand new, some of it's 50 years old. And it has to stay on 24/7, right? And when you're operating something that always has to be on and can rarely ever be off, you really have to invest heavily in that system. We can see where capital outlays about 19 million in 26, moving to 20 million. In FY24, we were targeting more like 10 million in capital, but we've really, really stepped it up. We're going to double our capital expenditures because we need to catch up on the system. And you can see the in lieu payment is around 6 million, then it moves to 6.9. It's normal. That in lieu payment that REU makes to the city general fund, it fluctuates year to year because one year is kind of, and Greg can correct me in any moment, or Barry can, one year is a little bit estimated, the other year does a catch up once they figure out what assets REU has placed in service to then charge that in lieu off of. So that one's going to move around a little, but not much. Personnel, the FY27 personnel expenditures reflects a 4.1 increase over FY24 actuals. FY25 adopted budget, we did not amend that budget after MOU increases and approvals because we were looking at personnel vacancies that we had, and we're not targeting an amendment on the budget. There's no new positions are requested. There is a typo. We do not have 205. We have 202. So my apologies for that. This FY '26 and '27, it captures changes to the council approved MOUs. The offset of the retirement costs, the PARS payment has ended, which has really offset a lot of the labor costs from the recent approved MOUs from the council. And then the FY '25 budget, as I mentioned, was developed in 2023, that was prior to the significant changes in the MOUs. But I do want to make sure that council knows in our 5-year plan, and I'll get to that a little bit later, that shows the rate increases and our days of cash on hand, personnel increases were always included in that. And that's when we were discussing this with council back in 2024 and in negotiations, that was the kind of the clarity point of how does this impact rates and how does this impact cash, which is important. O&M is moving up by 9.2 million from FY '25 to '27. And I would say this is what we would, I don't want to be a budget victim, but this is kind of non-controllable O&M. The controllable O&M we've held flat. We've got 3.8 million moving up from power supply and natural gas prices. We're spending 2 million more on wildfire mitigation efforts. The bulk of that is additional vegetation crews, contract crews getting out. We go out and we do inspections, either boots on the ground, every mile, every inch. We've done LiDAR inspections in past years, and when you do inspections and you find areas that need to be trimmed and removed, you now have to resource that staff and get it out there. We're also funding additional positions with Travis's team in parks. There's part of the CAL FIRE grant that came in order to fully realize that. We're going to get a few more folks out there working in our right-of-way. They're a very effective team. They do a great job managing basically any vegetation that's on the ground in the right-of-way, which allows our arborists and tree trimmers to work up in the air, right? And it doubles the speed there. We have cost increases from safety measures. I would say that one really wasn't that controllable. 3 years ago, I requested that Reading Electric kick off a utility-wide safety program. 2 years ago, it started in earnest, and now we're really up and running, looking at what it takes to really be not I would say meeting the safety goals, but going above and beyond. And it's really important with electric, as it is with any other department. We have people with chainsaws, we have power plants with natural gas and really bad chemicals. We have crews that touch 12,000 volts or 115,000 volt wires. Everything that we're doing could be unsafe. We really have to invest in that. And it's going well, but it does cost money, but it's safety, and I think it's valuable. We did have a $400,000 increase in insurance. I don't think I have to explain that to anybody in the room if you're trying to insure anything from your car to your house to your power plant. The power plant moved up in valuation because if we were to have a catastrophic accident, it would cost, I would say, they're saying double now to replace it, which means the insured value has doubled, which means the premium reflects the increase. Because there's a lot of data centers and there's a lot of new load in the world that is building power plants as feverishly as they can. And so the demand for new power plants and new turbine engines has really skyrocketed. So the insurance companies know that and they're aware and they price it appropriately. Lastly, customer programs and services increases. As we increase rates, we increase our spending on residential energy discounts and other offerings to our lower income customers. It's just part of the program. There's 2.85% of our retail revenue gets spent in that area. That's part of the O&M. Jumping into capital, and I promise we're gonna be done quick here. FY '26, a majority of that 23.8 million is overhead and underground infrastructure. Just replacing the poles and the wires and the stuff that we depend on every day, that some of it we can't even see. I mentioned there's a power plant building renovation that's happening, securitizing our substations, which is important, even more so in this world of physical attack and bad actors. And then our GIS utility network software is, well, not just Reading Electric's, everybody's is getting changed and replatformed, and so we need to invest in that. Similar for FY '27, it's additional overhead and underground infrastructure, power plant renovation. We're planning on moving our backup power control center to the AvTech building as a TOTOP, transmission owner, transmission operator registered entity. We feel that moving our backup center to Avtech, which is a 24/7 building with full backup generation and full 24/7 facilities capability, is a wise move. We will also join our power trading team in that backup if needed. That is budgeted for FY27 as well. Looking at our debt strategy, there's 2 slides on it. We have existing debt, about $14.4 million through FY24. FY25 is $14.8. As council's aware, we recently issued $70 million, a touch under, of tax-exempt debt for our infrastructure project. That is going to move our debt payment up between 18.6 and 19.7. And a good question to ask is, why isn't it flat? Why doesn't, if you issued it, how come the mortgage isn't the same every year? When you issue bond debt, the bonds are sold and priced per year. So in this go-round, the bond market was interested in more in certain years than others, and so the debt payment's a little bit lumpy. And we don't know why they want certain years. It's whoever the buyer is looking to fill a portfolio. So there'll be a little bit of variance there. We also are maintaining a $25 million line of credit to ensure that we have adequate liquidity if reserves need to be drawn down. That's important. Other utilities, and I've spoken with a lot of utility directors trying to gauge the days of cash on hand that they want in the bank account. Our target is 180 days of cash. That's kind of our max. Our minimum 75 days of cash. And Reading Electric spends about $400,000 a day. So that's this is the industry standard. Some utilities will want to have 250 days of cash on hand. I know some want 300 or 400 days of cash on hand. In a more affluent communities, they can do that because what you're doing is raising rates enough to extract money out of the community and then stick it in your bank account just in case something bad happens. Well, I don't find it appropriate in Reading to extract another $25 million out of everybody's bank accounts and put it in Reading Electric's. This $25 million credit line costs us about 0.8 basis points a year, roughly $70,000, $80,000 a year to have instant access to $25 million, which allows us to simulate, I would say, more 220, 230 days cash on hand without actually pulling it out of the community. I think it's a wise strategy. And it will also, if, for example, we, knock on wood, had a catastrophic failure at Reading Power of a turbine engine, and it's a $15 million replacement, we could probably draw down reserves or draw down that credit line, not our cash reserves, until we have time to plan through the rate process to build that back up. So debt service, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this slide. 2025, you can see moving to 26, we added the debt service to service the $70 million worth of bond issuance. And then in 2030 to 2031, there's a very large drop-off, roughly in half of debt, which is good for Reading Electric and the city of Reading because it gives us debt capability to manage the future that is relatively unknown at this point. You know, if California bans natural gas power plants, we'll be looking to build probably a third 230 kV interconnection with the federal government with WAPA to then be able to export and import into Reading with high reliability. That would cost a lot of money, require debt issuance. Or conversely, if we need to build additional energy storage in Reading or more power plant in Reading, then we have the headroom here. I think it's a wonderful strategy. It makes me very happy as an electric director to know that in 5 years, $12 million a year debt service is leaving and coming off the books, especially in an uncertain future. So quickly, the financial plan is where wrapping this up. We have a strategic plan that informs the budget, then the budget is part of informing the 5-year plan. This is a chart. Assistant Director Bowers puts this up at the quarterly financial updates. You're very familiar with it. We are actually planning to come, there's a staff report waiting for my review. We're planning to come at the next meeting in June with our quarterly updates. You can see, just starting from the top, you've got the fiscal years ending June 30, so this is the plan. These are rate adjustments. We've had the 4% has already gone into effect, and then we're looking at 5% rate forecast each year. You can see the increase and decrease in, let's call it the fund account, the bank account. You can see where the reserves days of cash on hand is moving around, staying in that target range, and then dropping down in 2030, it's dropping down towards 127, 128. This is, it's okay. It's normal. We have bandwidth. The alternative is we raise rates to move it back up to 150, or we issue additional debt to pay for more capital. At this point, I see no need to do either one of those two things. I think we can stay comfortably within this bandwidth. It'll also give us time to see if load growth materializes and additional retail sales, come to the table. What's the most important to me is this affordability key performance indicator on the bottom. Are we staying at or below 2.5% of the median income for a family in Reading? And the answer is yes, with these rate increases. We've been over 2.5%. I think I've talked about this at a different time. And that's when you get noticed in the stack of bills on the kitchen table. What is going on? Why is this electric bill so high? It's not registering with the groceries and the cell phones and everything else. So, we're trying to keep these rate adjustments down. It's okay to burn cash reserves down a little bit. We also have that $25 million credit line. And, you have to be cognizant of affordability on KPIs. The customers do feel it and they will know it. So here's my takeaways on this 5-year plan, which includes the 2 years here of the budget. We have significant capital investment. It does assume the likely approval of a rate increase and ongoing affordability KPI compliance. It meets the city's reserve metric, and it manages some unplanned events that could influence a plan. So we could have significant wholesale sales. The market is running short on supply, and I do see some opportunities for a utility in our position with some length to supply that market and see some wholesale revenue come in. However, we are seeing an increase in power supply costs. There's some federal tax policy uncertainty that we're not quite sure what that will do to the future of solar and storage and wind projects. And California is quickly shifting on its state climate goals. We're not sure if that means it's going to go faster for zero carbon or slower or right in the middle. But having this 5-year plan is pretty solid. I think we can manage the outcome. And lastly, I think it's important we look at our rates. This is a residential bill at 850 kilowatt hours. It's about what the average residential customer uses as of February 2025. You can see Reading's 5th lowest in the state, where the investor-owned utilities are double, if not more than that, 2.5 times more than that. I do know the electric directors at the rest of these utilities, and they are all looking at rate increases similar, if not higher than Reading. I won't reveal their secrets yet, but I would say we are trending much below average in rates and rate increases. And I do want to commend the RU finance team again in their pricing and risk management that coming out of COVID in the past few years, most of the utilities had double-digit rate increases. 10% was common, 15%, a pair of 15%. I know one utility had a 100% rate increase, just doubled the rates. And what this team was able to do was hedge power supply appropriately with the short-term and long-term group, and then use cash reserves, and then use our financing tools to smooth out rates and not shock our community with unneeded expenses right at the wrong time. And I think it shows we are in, I would say, some of the best company in the state here. And for that, I am very grateful and proud. And that is the end of what I have today. And if there's any questions, we'll take those. If the questions are hyper detailed, we will jot them down and I will get back to you with a full write-up.
Councilmember Resner.
Could you go back to the last slide? I would just like to make an unofficial request that we always beat Dan Beans in Roseville in our rate. In a friendly competition. For those who don't know, Dan Beans is former REU director, and he left us to go to Roseville, so I appreciate beating him in.
Yeah, it's a
Our
personal
rates.
quest of mine.
Yeah,
I
it's
have
a
my
it's a
intel out.
personal quest between Dan Beans and
I know where he's
so
headed, so.
I appreciate that.
Yep.
Good job.
Yep.
Yeah.
Do you-
Councilmember Lataw. What's up?
Me?
Yep, you're Lataw, right?
So it's pretty exciting to see our bond debt go down by 2030. Obviously, that gives us room if you need to go back and do more bonds later for more infrastructure. But hypothetically, if we weren't having to go get more bonds in the future, what do you sort of think that might be on our rate increases looking at 2030? Do you think we'd be able to level that off? Or do you think we'll carry that past 5%? into
So I want to
2030?
say, hopefully we can level it off, and here's why. In order to issue bond debt at, say, the $12 million per year debt service level, we just issued $70 million, and that's costing us a little over $4.5 million. We would be issuing 12+ million a year, so that would be $200+ million in debt. I don't see that happening unless we have a major power plant construction project or a major expansion in Reading. I do think what we're going to see is an increase in power supply for solar energy storage projects, maybe wind. There's an offshore wind project that the state is very hot and heavy on. I think what we'll do is replace debt with power purchase agreements. But I don't know if we're going to see it at that level of $12 million a year. I think what we're hoping for is, to your point, Councilmember Latah, is to stabilize a little bit on these rates, bring them down to, maybe just 2% or something less at a more of an inflationary level. That's a great question, though.
I think I would add to that, just also, we're spending a lot of money on infrastructure today and for the next several years. I think I can speak for Nick that the intent is to keep some higher level of expenditures and not fall back on relying on depreciation of our system. And so there'll probably be some higher levels of O&M expenditures on out into those years as well.
Yeah, we can't get back to the place where we borrow from the system again and then get behind and then we play catch up again. It's you can do that once. I've been through it. I don't want to do that again. I think we're much better suited to stay at the normal level of replacement. Yeah.
Thank you. Councilmember Danuka.
I have a couple of questions. The rates you showed were for residential customers, and can you tell us a little bit about the rates increase or changes over the last few years for the small commercial customers?
Yeah, so residential, small commercial, and large commercial were all raised at about the same level. So there was a 4% rate increase went into effect on January 1, 2024, and a 4% rate increase January 1, 2025. The cost of service analysis that we performed indicated that the majority of that revenue increase needed to be on the fixed costs. So for residential customers at home, that's your meter charge or your service charge. For small commercials, it's the same. For large commercial, it's going to be more on your demand charge. So large commercials is a different rate class to where, because they're such heavy, intense users of electricity, let's call it an EV charger, a Tesla charger. Let's pick on them. When somebody pulls in and they plug it in, it could use up to 200 kilowatts of power instantaneously, which would be equivalent to probably City Hall with the air conditioners on, just out of one car charger. And that that creates a major strain on the grid and the assets needed to serve that instant capacity. So it's been an average 4% rate increase on January 1, 2024 and in 2025, applied to mostly the fixed charges based on cost of service, so that it hasn't been more or less to any customer class.
So can you give me a definition of large commercial versus small?
So small commercial is a customer that uses less than 25 kW of instantaneous demand over a 6-month period. If you register more than 25 kilowatts of instantaneous demand over a 6-month period, you move to a large commercial. So for size comparison, a mini mart would be a small commercial customer, and Mercy Hospital would be a large commercial customer.
The reason
Reading City Hall is a
the
large
reason I bring this is I'm hearing from a lot of kind of a not Mercy size but smaller commercial people also, which would consider themselves small and mid-size, and they have seen a significant rate increase because of the peak demand, and they get into those category too.
Sure. So what I believe what you're probably referencing, what they're mentioning to you is many years ago, there was a rate restructuring took place that changed that demand level and lowered it to move you from small commercial to large commercial. But the other thing that takes place is when you move from a small commercial customer paying about 16 to 17 cents a kilowatt hour with no demand charge, you move to large commercial, you're going to pay about 10 cents a kilowatt hour, and then you add the demand charge. So you don't pay the same for the energy, but you pay more for demand.
Yeah, I'm just bringing the feedback that I'm hearing from a lot of commercial customers that have seen significant increase because of this peak demands. And they may not understand exact details,
Sure.
but that's just a feedback which I hear from people.
And I think it's good feedback. I think something that we're cognizant of, and I've talked to the finance team and the pricing and risk team, is as more businesses install level 2 chargers out front. So say you're a dental office building, so you're a small commercial, but you put 4 level 2 chargers out front, you could then trigger yourself into a large commercial rate just on that demand. So I think that's incumbent upon us as a utility to go back and say, okay, with this kind of proliferation of EVs and EV charging, is the old version of large commercial and small commercial still applicable? Or do we need to look at
But
that?
I'm
And I
talking
think-
about, the people who say that they have not done those kind of significant changes. So just a feedback, something to look into, and maybe we can take this conversation offline also. But there are a lot of people who are caught up in those things without those EV chargers. That brings me to the next question. We do see these EV chargers, let's say, near the Civic Auditorium and all that. Is REU subsidizing them, or they're charging them full charge, paying full charges for that?
So, no, we're not subsidizing. So EV chargers, say Tesla chargers, when they install those, they pay the same large commercial rate that any other large commercial customer pays. I think in order, the subsidy would come in as if your rates were wrong, right? If our rates and our cost allocation methodology was incorrect, then they could be getting subsidized. But, as I mentioned, those chargers come along and they have a very large demand profile, and it's instantaneous demand. They know it, and the companies know it, and they price it appropriately. When you go plug in your car and you pay, you may be paying, say, 40 to 50 cents a kilowatt hour, if not a little bit more. And on the large commercial, they're going to pay 10 cents for the energy, and then they're going to pay $20 for the demand charge. So they price that in their models, but yeah, there's no subsidy.
Thank you.
Councilman Rodette.
Hi.
Okay, so I want to make sure I know what we're approving or we're moving forward. Or is this informational? Are we agreeing on what your revenue projections are and what your expenditure projections are? And then this is going to come back, obviously, for a rate increase later?
No. So what you're looking at here is what we would bring for the final budget approval in the second meeting in June.
Okay,
Rate increases, a rate process, there will be an entire process separate for that. Public outreach, coordination, communication. And as we get closer to that, then there'll be we'll set a public hearing with the council. There'll be one meeting, and that'll span 30 days, and then we'll hold a public hearing with the council where we'll present it, and there'll be an opportunity for customers to come give their feedback during the public hearing, opportunity for the council to give feedback, and ultimately make a decision to yes or no approve the rate increase.
so is this budget based on the idea that we would make
Yes.
these types of rate increases?
Yes.
When does the previous rate increase end and the new one have to begin? What year?
Well, they don't end. So what they do is you increase the energy rate or the demand rate for large commercial, and that stays.
Right.
It stays
But
on,
what year are we going to need to make this decision on the rate increase?
We're probably going to be coming this fall with another rate package.
So the
for-
one that we approved was only up until this year?
Yeah, it was a 2-year.
Two-year,
It was
okay.
approved in December of 2023, went
Right.
into effect January 1, 24, and then January 1, 25.
Okay. So, so we're currently in the 4%,
Yes,
but next year we're going to move to 5%.
we're going to recommend a 5%, yes.
Okay. So I appreciate the budget with actuals. So helpful. So the outlier is the 24, 25, because we don't have those numbers.
We
yet.
have actual 24s, actual 25s. We will bring what we have so far for quarter 2 and quarter 3.
Three, yep.
We'll bring that June 3rd at the next council
So that
meeting.
at least we know what are we trending in the right direction?
Yes, we are.
On this? Because it's sort of the outlier.
It is. It looks a little odd that FY '24 actuals were here,
Yeah.
'25 budget drops down, and then '26 goes back up.
Is it more likely that it just stayed
Yes.
going up?
Yep.
It's not going to drop off?
No.
In actually, okay. So it just seems like it's heading in the right direction. But as far as income goes, because there isn't we don't have this for your revenue, but it does say that you project that the revenue will increase by 13.6 million. Obviously, you have a zero sum, so what your expenditures are is your revenue, right?
Well, not
I'm
exactly. So
assuming?
expenditures are higher than revenues because we are going to use the bond revenues. So out of the 70
the
million,
capital?
we'll use the bond revenues to cover that gap.
Ca- okay.
I guess, in a sense, it's a zero sum. We also assume savings in personnel and O&M in that. We budget for the whole thing in expenditures, but we assume some savings on revenue because historically, if I have 202 full-time equivalent positions, I don't have 202 people working for me all the time. I have people retiring, people resigning, new people getting hired. And so when you have that churn of, say, 5 to 10%, you just naturally, you budget for all your positions.
Sure.
But from a revenue perspective, we don't need the revenue for all 202 because they're just never gonna, that's not gonna
Be
happen.
full.
Yep.
So when you come back, are you going to bring a chart on revenues?
Yes.
To show us what the revenues would be? So what exactly would we be approving today? Just that you're heading in the right direction?
Yeah, this is just kind of, an opportunity for me to show the budget and then get feedback from the council. So what I'm hearing is when we come with the budget, with the total budget for the city, that you'd like to see a revenue projection on top of the expense project, and then how we're filling that gap with bond.
Yeah, I think for the public too, because anytime that there's something that you're doing, especially with the new stuff that may be coming, the Roundup issue, I think the public just wants to know, are we paying the rates? I mean, especially if you're going to have an increase of 5% year over year, that's pretty big. That's a big number. I've not seen it go that long at 5%. And I haven't been here that long, but I haven't seen that kind of, it was a very big deal when we did the 2%, 4%, that was a big deal. So I think it's as much transparency as possible of what our bills are, how we're paying them. I think the public would appreciate that so that it's eyes wide open.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And in the rate process, we have several public workshops.
Yeah.
We bring a series of folks together from around the community to represent that. We teach them cost of service, we teach them budget, we teach them rates, and then actually bring them in and they can start deciding as a group, where do they want this to head a little bit? Because it's their utility, so to speak.
And then where would that conversation happen with maybe this, how we've done small and large commercial and that rate analysis? Do you do a rate analysis with them? Sounds like something you would do.
We do. And that conversation will happen with that stakeholder group.
Okay. Great.
Yep.
Thank you.
I just have one question. How does the solar affect our revenue, all the new solar subdivisions going in and?
Sure. So solar is a generator at a customer's property. So that means they don't need to buy electricity from REU. So what solar panels do is reduce the amount of sales that we make to the customer, which is totally okay. We're nonprofit. We're not looking to sell power to make a profit on. It reduces revenue, but we forecast that and plan for it. And, interestingly, I think it's important that some utilities I think they get a bad rap for being anti-solar and things. We're not anti-solar at all. It's actually helpful. Because as you're growing and there's new load coming online, if a customer wants to put a solar system in and spend their capital on that and take that risk of maintaining and owning and operating that, it just reduces the amount of energy we have to either go buy from the market or build here locally. But yeah, what it looks like to us, Mayor Munz, is, and actually this is interesting in the real-time operator desk, is if there's a cloud comes over, you'll see a bunch of load appear on the screen. Demand goes up. And then when the cloud goes away and the sun comes out, the load starts to disappear because the solar panels come on at the residence and provide energy there, so they don't need us to sell them the power.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Resner.
I just wanted to make a motion to accept the presentation regarding the current budget development and to just suggest staff continue this direction.
I'll second.
All right. All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Who's up next? Who's on first? Mr. Webb.
Thank you. Thank you, Honorable Mayor and members of the council. First off, just to be clear, there was no coordination today regarding Director Zettel and I prior. He just happened to dress sharp today, as usual. But somehow, the gray hair that may have been in his beard has made it up to me somehow. So we're gonna have to talk about that later. Anyways, it is my pleasure to be here this afternoon to present to you the Public Works budget for the next 2 years. Before I jump into that, I really want to thank the Public Works staff, as well as Director Robinette's staff for helping me put this together. As Director Zettel mentioned, this does not happen in a vacuum. It takes a number of staff, a large amount of resources and time to put this information together. So huge kudos to them and all their teams. So thank you. So with that, I will jump into it. So I'm going to touch on this afternoon predominantly the enterprise funds within Public Works. So those would cover the water, wastewater, storm drain, and the solid waste utilities. I will touch on briefly the internal service funds such as fleet, electrical techs, and USA Locates, as well as RMU admin, as well as the transportation and engineering group, and special revenue funds. And I say that I'll briefly touch on the internal service funds, transportation and engineering, as well as the special revenue, because those were previously covered by Director Robinette in his previous presentations. So as an overview for Public Works for the 2 years, fiscal year 25-26, we're looking at approximate $150 million budget with just under 300 full-time equivalents. And you might be wondering why there's 296.75 full-time equivalents. That has to do with that we do have some part-time staff. And so we don't quite make full 300, but we're almost there. And you can see for year 2, slightly bit reduced budget, roughly 144 million, with a few less staff there. And then you can see the 4 main food groups, you may call them, that make up the budget in general. A small amount of debt service there. About a quarter of our budget is roughly personnel, with roughly 40% being materials, supplies, and services, and then roughly another 40% being our capital outlay or projects. What I have here is a table that essentially breaks down those charts we were looking at on the previous slide. And so what I'm showing here is that for the enterprise funds or the municipal utilities, which again are water, wastewater, solid waste, and storm drain, for the current fiscal year that we are in, the 24-25 year, we have an amended budget of just shy of 119 million and roughly 189 full-time equivalent positions. And I'm going to attempt to use the pointer here. Oh, it doesn't show up very well on the screen, but you'll see down below that for fiscal year 25-26, our proposed budget is slightly more, just under 122 million, so roughly $3 million in excess of the current amended budget, so roughly a 2% increase. You'll also see that there are a few more positions requested, which I will touch in detail here in the following slides. And then you'll see our year 2 budget dips a little bit down to 150, from 121 down to 115. And then conversely, you'll see that same type of information shown for each of the other 4 main groups within Public Works. The internal service funds have a 25-26 budget of roughly 13.6 million requested. That is a slight increase of 6.7% over the current amended amount. Again, I'll touch on the positions here in a future slide. And then you see year 2 there at 14.1 million for the internal service funds. Then you'll see the transportation and engineering group hovering right around $13 million for both years. So pretty consistent with the current adopted budget, or excuse me, amended budget for fiscal years 24 and 25. And then you'll see our special revenue funds, which essentially this is the citywide TIF or the North Reading Traffic Benefit District, I have to say it slowly each time, or NRTBD TIF. Those are fees that we collect through development projects, and then we put those funds on projects as we deliver them. So you can see that we're projecting to actually spend a little bit less than we have in the current year within the upcoming budget. So with that, I'm gonna jump into the meat and potatoes of my slide this afternoon, which are the enterprise funds within Public Works. And again, those are made up by the 4 utilities within Public Works: the water utility, the wastewater utility, storm drain utility, and the solid waste utility, which does include the West Central landfill. I apologize in advance. If it appears I'm looking down at my notes, I am. I want to make sure I capture the information, relay the information correctly. So I'm going to hit the water utility first. You'll notice that we have a projected, or proposed, excuse me, year 1 budget of just over $38 million with a projected revenue of $34 million. So there's roughly a $4 million gap between the revenue and our projected expenditures. That is essentially coming from the number of capital projects that we have in the pipeline that are either being designed or constructed, and simply the timing of when those expenditures occur. You will also see that we have 1 new position that we're requesting. This is a maintenance worker position within Public Works. This is a position that we very much need. We have roughly, get into my notes here. And I can't find it, but we have a number of fire hydrants and a number of valves that need to be exercised annually within the city. And I want to say we have roughly 4,500 fire hydrants and thousands of valves throughout the water utility that if we don't exercise them, they tend to break and fail. And we to date do not have a dedicated staff member that spends time going out and exercising those valves to ensure that when they are needed, they function. So this position would help us get that accomplished.
What does that mean when you exercise?
That would mean simply going and
Jacks?
jumping jacks could be part of it, but no, it essentially means going out, opening the valve, getting down in there, right, open it up, make sure it flows, close it, just make sure that it functions. A lot of times, if you don't use them for a number of years, they just lock closed and it becomes hard to open them. Thank you. So, good question. So you'll see that year 2 of the water utility, you'll see that the proposed budget dips slightly. It goes from 38 million down to about 34.5 million. And again, you'll see that the revenue there for year 2 is actually projected to exceed our expenditures in year 2. So what you're seeing there between the 2 years is just really the timing of a number of the water utility projects from when they come to fruition. So that would be the difference there. Jumping to the wastewater utility, you'll see that for 24-25, the current year that we are in, we have an amended budget of just over $43.5 million. And you'll see that we are proposing a $48 million budget for 25-26, and we're anticipating roughly $41 million in revenue. So again, a $7 million difference between the two. However, very similar to the water utility, that difference is due to the timing of the capital projects that are funded by the wastewater utility and when those projects actually go to construction and those expenditures occur. And you'll see in year 2 for the wastewater utility as well, our proposed budget drops from 48 million down to just under 44, but it is still in year 2 is slightly above the revenue. And again, all due to the timing of the projects. In the wastewater utility, we also have requested 3 new positions. One being a plant mechanic at the Clear Creek Wastewater Treatment Plant. This position is critical to providing the preventative maintenance and the day-to-day maintenance of the new pyrolysis system that is now up and running and creating biochar. And without that position, we would really struggle to perform the maintenance to that piece of equipment that we've invested a lot of time and resources in. So that is a requested position that we direly need. We're also requesting a lab technician. We currently have 3 lab technicians and 1 supervisor at the Clear Creek Wastewater Treatment Plant. With the growing number of regulations and tests and samples and everything that we're required to do on the wastewater side, at both of our treatment facilities, Clear Creek and Stillwater, we gravely need another lab technician to help us out there. And we do anticipate in the near future that on the water side of the house, as regulation continues to grow on the drinking water side, we would like to expand and use the wastewater lab to perform those tests to minimize the number of tests we're sending out to external labs. So we hope to save some money on the water side there one day.
Can I ask a question?
And then we also have a lead worker position that we're requesting on the wastewater side. Yes, sir.
I just had a question.
Oh.
Are we factoring in, aren't we able to sell the biochar? Possibly?
Yep.
Is that being factored in as far as revenue, or we don't really know necessarily, or do we have any contracts for that, or?
So we have someone that's operating it for us, and that's part of their contract. We get a portion of the proceeds of the sales of biochar, and they keep a portion of it as well to cover their costs, expenses, and profit.
So is that included in some of what projected revenue is going to be in being able to sell that?
Yes.
That's included? What makes up the difference if your budget is higher than, how do you pay for this difference?
Are you talking about the?
25, 26, there's like a $7 million difference. What pays for that?
So essentially it's our capital projects, right? Because projects don't get designed and constructed in 1 year. But when we program the dollars for the project, that's where those dollars are tied in that specific year. So we're delivering and administering projects that have been planned and designed previously that happen to go to construction in that year. The money was already, and Director Robinette's going to need to excuse me because I'm very likely going to use the wrong terms, may have been encumbered or accounted for, but it's simply sitting in our cash reserves because we didn't use it during that
So
fiscal
it's
year.
encumbered funds inside of our cash reserves for this specifically? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's essentially what's happening for all of my utilities because it's the capital projects,
Got
right?
it.
Because they just can't be planned, designed, and built in 1 year.
Got it. Thanks.
But that's a very good question. Thank you. So jumping to storm drain, it's a similar story, just a much smaller budget. You'll see that we have a slight decrease in our budget, proposed budget from 25-26 as compared to 24-25. You'll see that there again, we do have a proposed budget of 2.5 million that is roughly $250,000 in excess of our revenue. And again, to Councilmember Odette's question, again, that would be tied to the timing and delivery of the storm drain capital improvement projects and using the cash reserves. Then you'll see in year 2 of the budget, a slight uptick in our proposed amount, 2.6, and a slight uptick in revenue again, but again, the timing of the projects and burning the cash reserves that were planned for projects previously. Last but not least, I have the solid waste utility, that does include the West Central landfill. You'll see a pretty significant drop in our proposed budget for year 1 of just over $33 million, which is roughly $5 million less than our amended budget for the current year, 24-25. However, you will notice that that is approximately $500,000 over the solid waste's revenue projection. In the solid waste arena, this again will be covered by cash reserves, but this isn't so much tied to our capital projects as much as it is tied to the city's organic food requirement and the assumptions that were made on the commercial folks complying. We've struggled a little bit to get the compliance that we assumed out of the gate. As council may recall, we've sent out letters, we've coordinated with businesses, and we are seeing an uptick in compliance in the commercial food waste program. However, we are going to have to burn into our cash reserves in both years, or we're planning to, by roughly $500,000 a year until we catch up there. And we do have adequate cash reserves to do that. I will note it was always the plan to burn into cash reserves a little bit to get to compliance with the organic food waste program. It's just taken us a little bit longer than we thought. Hence the letters, the outreach, and I want to give Assistant Director Clements and his team compliments for all the outreach that they've been doing in that regard. So I'm going to pause for a second because I feel like I tossed a lot of information across the room, and this really is the meat and potatoes of the Public Works Enterprise Fund. So I'm going to pause for questions, if there are any. Okay, and I'm going to keep marching forward. So here, essentially, I have some donut charts, if you will, that capture what I just described verbally, just to help visualize what's going on. Again, we're looking at the water utilities budget for both years. Just over $38 million year one, just under 35 year two. You can see that personnel makes up less than 20% in both options, or both years, excuse me. Roughly half of the budget is encompassed by operating materials, supplies, and services, with roughly a third to 40% covering our capital improvement projects, such as water main replacements and so forth. Here I further break down the water utility operating budget by function. So this would cover the operating and expenses as well as staff time. So you can see that the admin is roughly 13%. You can see that our water production team is roughly 7%, treatment roughly 40%, and then systems and operations and maintenance roughly another 40%. So this gives a breakdown of the staffing and the O&M for the water department for both years. And then conversely, this would be the last leg for the water department. This is a breakdown of the capital projects that we have in both years. So you can see that in year one, we have a small percentage of projects in the structures and improvement category. So this would be your, it'd be our not catch basins. It would be the water structures themselves. We have our groundwater wells, roughly 3%, pumps, about 18%, and you can see the lion's share of our water capital projects, 3/4 I might add, really are just replacing water mains. So, and I'm sure that each of you have noticed that around town when you're driving around, which is a good thing that we're doing that. This is a chart that generally we like to include, and I believe my predecessor did. It is a little bit of a busy table, I might add, but really what it's trying to do is on the very leftmost column, it breaks down all of our water mains by pipe diameter, and then across the top, it provides 3 categories based on age. So for instance, the number kind of at the top left, 471,672, what that is saying is that we have roughly 500,000 feet of pipe that is 8 inches or smaller in diameter, somewhere between the age of 0 and 30 years. And so what we've done is we break our pipe up into those 3 age groups: brand new to 30, 31 to 60, and older than 60. And this is a big indicator for us on really the condition of our water pipes. And you can imagine that we definitely want them to last a long time, but there is a sweet spot. And depending on the type of pipe material, that sweet spot changes. But this is always a good indicator for us on how are we doing with our water main pipe replacement. So I like to throw this up there and just remind council that roughly 20% of our pipe in the ground is 0 to 30 in age. We do have roughly half of our pipe in that 31 to 60 age, and then we have about 9% older than 60 years.
It's nice to see that the over 60 is going strong.
They're doing well.
I have a question. Do you have a chart that shows us what type of pipe this is? I'm assuming there's a large amount of that is like clay that's in that over 60 category, but do we have any, I know we maybe don't have great records from that far back, but do we have any idea how much of that is?
We have a decent idea.
Obsolete.
I could definitely come back, like Director Zettel said, with additional information on that.
It's not urgent. It could be an email.
Yeah, I can get that to you. So moving on, this is another chart that we like to throw up there for the water utility. This looks at all of our pipe that I just showed on the previous slide, lumps things into a 5-year plan, with the red bar being the expiring pipe, kind of to Councilmember Resner's question, based on condition and age, when is it expiring, and then the blue line being our recommended replacement. And so you might see there in 25, 29, that 5-year span, which we're currently in, we're replacing quite a bit more pipe than is expiring in that time frame. But you'll notice we're playing a little bit of catch up from the previous cycle. So generally, we like to see the blue line be pretty even with the red, and we seem to be trending there and hope to continue that path. So this is a bar chart here that shows the breakup of the water utilities revenue. There are roughly 8 sources of revenue. We have the residential revenue, commercial, the fire service meter miscellaneous, we have real estate, interest, and connection fees. I do want to make a note down here. There is a typo on the slide, so I want to make sure I relay this correctly. These revenue forecasts were based on the council-approved 6.5% rate increase that began January 1st of this year, with another 6.5% that will go into effect January 1st of 26, meaning that sometime in 2026, you will see me up here with my team, and we will be going through the same exact process that Director Zettel lined out for rate hearings for the water utility to set us up for what are we going to do from 2027 and beyond. This chart assumes a 4% after January 1st of 2027. So now I jump into the same type of donut charts for the wastewater utility. And I'm going to run through these relatively quickly, but please interject with questions if you may have them. So similar to water, wastewater has a $48 million budget, or proposed $48 million budget year 1, roughly $44 million in year 2. Again, you see a small amount of debt service kind of hovering anywhere from 10 to 13%, personnel 15 to 17% between the years, with O&M around a third and capital outlay being the lion's share at about 40%. So a very similar breakup, if you will, as compared to the water department. When we look at the operating budget, which again would be our personnel and operating O&M, we kind of see where that lands within the departments there. We have a small amount with industrial waste. We have our admin team. Again, we have the debt service, and then we have both our treatment plants, Stillwater and Clear Creek, and then we have our collections team. And you'll see that that makes up roughly, go backwards here, roughly about half of the budget between those two, the personnel and the O&M, what we would call the operating budget. And then what makes up the remainder of the budget would be our capital outlay. So again, this would be the capital projects that are designed and administered by the engineering team. So you'll see that we have, main repairs and replacements, we have inflow and infiltration projects, we have interceptor projects, we have upgrades at the treatment plants, both Stillwater and Clear Creek, and then we have other just major maintenance. So a whole slurry of capital improvement type of projects, roughly $22 million in year 1 and $17 million in year 2. And then similar to the water utility, we have a similar chart that looks at expiring pipe and recommended replacement. And for some reason in the wastewater world, expiring pipe is blue and recommended replacement is red. So we swapped it up to make sure everybody's still awake. But you'll see kind of the same trend where we really like to make sure we're replacing as much as expiring, or we have a plan to deal with that. And this all comes from our pro formas and our master plans, I might add. And then similar to the water department, this is a bar graph that shows our projected revenues. And I do want to make another minor correction here. So similar to water, wastewater has had an approved 4% rate increase that went into effect January 1st of this year. And there's another 4% rate increase that goes into effect January 1st of 26. And so again, sometime in 26, I'll be up here for a rate hearing for wastewater to figure out what we would like to do beyond 2026. So we assumed in this bar chart 4% beyond 2026. So next I have the storm drain utility. Pretty small budget here, about $2.5 million per year. You can see that personnel makes up a pretty good chunk of it, roughly 40% in both years, with O&M about a third, small amount of debt services, and then a little tiny bit of capital outlay. I will say this is one of our poorest or financially constrained utilities that we have. We have an extensive amount of lane miles of culverts and channels that we are responsible for, and we are constantly struggling to find resources to properly maintain them. You'll see that when we look at the operating budget, which again, this is the personnel and O&M, it's roughly 9% debt. We've got about half personnel, small amount of O&M, and then we've got the fixed charges. And then we spend roughly $500,000 a year on capital improvements to the city's storm drain system. So it goes to catch basins, inlets, culverts, we're spending it. So this is a quick chart on their revenue. For 25-26, we're sitting at about 2.25. 26-27, we anticipate 2.4. This is really based on storm drain property assessments, which have been in place for a number of years. And if I recall correctly, for commercial properties, it's based on $19 per acre per month. And for a single family residence, I believe it's $16 per month. And then I believe for a multifamily unit is $10 per month. So they're very low and have not been adjusted for years, and it's paid through property taxes. And Director Robinette works with the county to collect that. Other than that, we have internal cross charges from the other utility departments that fund appropriately the storm drain. Last but not least, I have the solid waste division here. So year one, 25-26, we're looking at roughly a $33 million budget, a slight uptick in year two to $34 million, with capital outlay being roughly 5% in both years, personnel a third, and O&M, supplies, parts and materials being the lion's share, roughly 2/3 of the budget for solid waste. When we look at the operating budget per function, there are a number of functions out in solid waste. We've got the admin team, commercial collection, resource recovery, hazardous waste. We have 2 landfills, one that has been retired and we're monitoring, Benton Landfill, which we still have responsibility at. We also have residential collection, we have the roll-off collection team, we have the transfer station operations, street sweeping, and then we have the West Central Landfill, which we operate in partnership with Shasta County. And that really makes up the whole operating budget for the solid waste division. And then you'll see that solid waste does have some capital outlay, not as much as the other utilities within Public Works, but they do have some. And you'll see that they have roughly 8% at the landfill, a little bit in residential collection, maybe $400,000 or so. You'll see some in resource recovery, roll-off, commercial collection. These are various projects at the facilities that solid waste works at daily, that the engineering team is working with to make sure they have what they need. Roughly $1.5 million per year. And then this, very similar to the other utilities, would be their revenue chart, theirs being the solid waste department. And I do want to make clear here on this one, I believe there's a minor typo on the bottom left. Solid waste had an 8% increase that went into play January 1st of 25, and a 6% that goes into play January 1st of 26. And then similar to the other 3, I will be up here doing the hearings and studies and all that to see what happens in 27 and beyond. But for purposes of this bar chart, we assumed a 3% year-over-year increase. And with that, I was going to touch very quickly on the internal service funds. As I mentioned previously, Director Robinette covered this in his presentations. So you'll see that Fleet, ET USA Locate, and RMU Admin are all within the internal service funds. I'm going to jump over to the far right column, which is labeled total at the top. And you'll see that in the current fiscal year, the amended budget is just about $12.7 million. And you'll see that proposed for year one of the budget is 13.6 and proposed for year two is 14. There are upticks there. They're mainly equitable to, and I'm trying to recall the exact term the Director Zettel used, really, I don't believe it was non-negotiable, but it's really price increases in parts, materials, and supplies. You know, our fleet department's responsible for maintaining every piece of equipment here at the city, and we have to do that. And as prices continue to escalate, we have to pay those prices to maintain the equipment. That's a big chunk of it there. In the ET USA locate world, we are requesting one new electrical technician position. We have 125 plus signals. We have 2 very complex wastewater treatment plants that are running on SCADA and PLC and are becoming even more automated, as well as our 2 water treatment plants. And as we move into the world of cybersecurity at those facilities, we do have a dire need for another electrical technician to assist us in making sure that we're doing everything that we need to do so those facilities run 24/7, 365. Similar to the electric utility, those facilities cannot shut off. They are critical. And then you'll see in the RMU admin column there, a slight decrease in year one of our proposed budget as compared to 24-25, and then a little bit of an uptick in year two, but all in all, pretty much neutral with the current year amended budget. And again, Director Robinette covered these earlier, so I'm glossing over them quickly, essentially because they are technically within Public Works. But
So these were not included in the 5% decrease in O&M, none of the internal services, these are going up for O&M?
Yeah, that's mostly correct because as Director Webb stated, the internal service funds, if we reduce fleet, for instance, not only does it affect all the general fund departments, but affects REU, all the line vehicles, all the public works vehicles and everything else. So while we worked with each director doing internal service funds to minimize any of those increases into must-haves as opposed to nice-to-haves, those you will see in the internal service fund some increases in those.
Okay.
IT is another one where, you know, some of the things within our servers and IT and software, we just have to pay.
Okay, so it was not across the board, 5% decrease, it's only certain.
Only general fund, yes.
And none of these internal services.
And
are-
also, in general fund, so the 5% across the board, what we talked about was really as we looked at the current fiscal year we're in, when you look forward into the next budget, it wasn't just across the board. We actually looked at each and every department and reduced O&M where we could and as much as we could, travel, training, furniture, software purchases, and anything and everything. So it wasn't just across the board 5%. Some departments, development services, for instance, had a much greater reduction because we lowered some consultant services, whereas police department might have had, you know, not as many reductions because of some of the things that they needed to buy. So it was done strategically.
Are you moving on? Can I just request that these circles, while they're lovely, don't really give me any information about the past or like the actuals. So the report that REU did where it has actuals, so you can actually see it by a line item. Otherwise, I gotta do math and you gotta give it to me sooner so that I can calculate this with math, because if it's 13 million and it's 38%, I gotta do math up here, then I can't listen to what you're saying. So if it could be in a chart so that we understand like what's that cost and then it's broken down by category and what it was before and what it is, so we could see the trend or where you're saving and where you're not saving. And then these capital improvements would be great to have that in a chart. They're just a lot easier to read than I understand. I don't have to do math up here, which would save everybody, but just as a suggestion, this is what the budget looks like as far as my memory of what our budget looks like. So it would be great if it was in this form as well.
It is
Just
going to
because
be
it's-
that form.
Yeah, so for purposes of trying to understand if this makes sense or looks appropriate as far as what we're supposed to be judging, it would be great if it was in a line item and had some actuals in it so that we know if this is even close to the reality of what it's been. And then we can learn too. Thank you,
Understood.
sir. Continue with your circles. Keep going.
Okay. We have one more table with 4 circles.
I know. Spoke too soon.
Touching on this one quickly, again, Director Robinette covered this one in his presentation, but this summarizes the streets and engineering team, and you'll see that streets, we roughly about $1 million less in both year 1 and year 2 as compared to 24-25 amended. I will say that that's predominantly just a function of when the streets capital projects fall. It just happens that that's how it is. The engineering department, actually back up a smidge. Within the streets department, we are requesting an additional associate engineer position. Right now, within the streets department, we have 2, I believe, and we very much need a 3rd to assist us in traffic signal timing and other traffic engineering duties. As development projects occur around town and consultants are preparing traffic impact analysis or analyses, we have a number of traffic duties that are being swept by the wayside that we need an additional engineer to help us with in that capacity. So this budget proposal this afternoon does request an additional associate engineer within the traffic department. Conversely, within the engineering department, you'll see that 24-25, our current budget, we were roughly 1.75 million. That was the amended budget. You'll see a slight uptick there to 1.9, and then just below 2 million in year 2. Again, the engineering team, although it lives in the general fund, is essentially general fund neutral. But you will also notice that we're requesting an additional 2 new associate engineers there too. That's predominantly due to the fact that we do not have enough staff on board to deliver the capital improvement plan that we have. For instance, the current capital improvement plan spans a 5-year period and has roughly $720 million worth of projects within it. We've historically not been able to deliver any 1 year of projects in a number of years, or my understanding, and that does contribute slightly to the amount of carryover projects that occur, because if we cannot deliver them and then there are not enough consultants to deliver the projects either, it literally becomes how much work, how many hours are in the day. And by my analysis and working with the team, who I want to commend for sitting down and looking through the numbers with me, we drastically need additional staff in the engineering classification so we can deliver those projects. We have the funds for them within the utilities, within streets. We just need the staff to get them out the door so the infrastructure can be replaced and maintained and kept in a good state of repair. All in all, you'll see that within the transportation and engineering group, when you add the 2 of them together, we're slightly below the 24-25 amended amount, which was 13.8 million. We're coming in just above $13 million between streets and the engineering team. So now to jump to the donuts. Again, this is just that same information, just in the circles or the donuts. I'm not going to bore you all with that, just looking at the clock, knowing that Assistant City Manager Bade still has a presentation, but this essentially just regurgitates the same information that I had in the previous table. And then lastly I have here, this is the special revenue funds. Again, as I mentioned initially, this covers the parking and our traffic impact fee. You'll see that our parking amended budget for the previous year was about $474,000. We've looked at all the data in our current compliance rate and our goals, and worked with Chief Barner and others, and we're confident that we can have a revenue of around that same amount, $476,000 in both years, which essentially makes parking revenue neutral. That is the goal. I will add that our loan payment for the parking equipment goes away, I believe, in roughly a year and a half, which will save us roughly $140,000 to $150,000 per year. So that is a good thing. So in the parking world, we should be fine. Traffic impact fee world, again, as I mentioned very early in my presentation, this is simply the traffic impact fees that are collected from development projects. And then as we program and deliver projects, we spend some of that money. So you're seeing a slight downturn. We had 1.3 million programmed in 24-25, and you're going to see a slight downturn in the programmed amount in both these 2 years, down to $1 million per year. It is simply just a function of the projects that we're moving forward with and the costs of those projects. So with that, I'm available for any questions that you may have.
First of all, I thank you for all the things that you manage. We are a big city, 60 square miles, and we have much more lines of plumbing and wastewater and roads than any other city of comparable size. So I thank you, and as well as your staff, for doing a great work. Just a quick question is, if the parking is really revenue neutral, what's the benefit of it?
The benefit of the parking, that's a great
You don't have to go
question.
into the details of that, but I'm just saying that those equipment will soon fall apart, and so.
I think it's a great question. I'm glad you asked. The parking program, to my understanding, was never meant to be an income generator. It is really meant to make sure that we have proper turnover in the downtown area, and that way that the businesses can thrive. The ultimate goal is to have an 80% compliance, or excuse me, an 80% turnover, right? That way someone can go down there, go to dinner or shop, and be there for an hour or two, and then they can leave and someone else can come in. If we don't have a parking program, it would encourage people to park there all day, which would then make it harder for people to get down there and actually use the businesses. So the overall goal is to really support the businesses down there at the least amount possible, which would be to comply with parking instead of receiving a citation.
Yeah, the feedback I receive is that most people don't like it. And it's not a kind of a small town feel that we used to have anymore, because you're constantly worrying about tickets and all that. But just this, I don't want to go into the details of that.
Yeah, and I would just add, actually, this is a better thing for the city as far as parking. We used to pay about $100,000 out of the general fund every year for parking, because there's always been a parking program. There's always been a need to maintain curbs and, you know, all the stuff down there that is the parking system downtown. That cost about $100,000 to the general fund, so this being revenue neutral is a benefit. And then lastly, I would say, you know, the council went through several meetings and several studies and a lot of groups of input. However, the council maintains all the control, and if the council in the future wishes to cancel all parking downtown in terms of cost, you have the ability to do that. You just have to know that you have to pay for all of the turnover and everything else, because people still want the 2-hour turnover, and you have to have staff to actually go issue tickets to enforce that. That cost is about $150,000 a year, plus all the maintenance. So that is your decision to make.
Thank you.
I will entertain a motion.
Make a motion that we accept the report and suggest staff continue down this path.
A second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Says you're absent.
I don't know how I got to be absent.
It was just my bad.
You just what? Well, I vote yes. I don't know how to get it over there. All right, was it good enough? All right. Thank you, Mr. Webb. Yeah. Yeah, we try to do them both. Yeah. Mr. Bade.
Mayor and the members of the council, just be, prior to Airports Manager Andrew Solzvig beginning the airport's budget presentation, I just want to acknowledge that the airports division staff has really done great work, both at the Reading Regional Airport and also at Benton Field, you know, and have them heading in the right direction. This has not been really an easy task over the last few years. We had you know, a little bit of a management change. We've had some operational expenses that have increased. The economy has not been easy for the airport to absorb. And then also just trying to catch up on a number of backlog workload issues that existed. And then so today, as Andrew presents this budget, it's important to note that staff utilize conservative but aggressive revenue projections, considering the United new route to Denver, that new air service kicking off this week. And then, not only that air service, but also it's a ripple effect within our revenues as we look at car rental and concession revenues. That will definitely help generate some additional revenues. And then also, in addition, over the last couple of years, staff has been very diligent with grant reimbursements and our lease monitoring, also increasing fees to market rate. All these items have helped increase the revenues at the airport. And even with this diligence, there's more regulatory obligations that we have at the airport. We've also had some increased operational costs. And then we have a stack of deferred maintenance that keeps continuing to press on us that we have not fully got an answer for. As you'll note in the Airports Division budget presentation, we're presenting a balanced budget that will be monitored as we work through the fiscal year, and that any significant issues or projections that are off the mark, we will definitely report those back to the City Council and work with the City Manager to get that ironed out over time. With that said, I'd like to turn it over to Andrew, and if there's any questions beforehand, we're happy to answer those.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
What was the bump from when you added service, like to Los Angeles or Avella? Like what kind of a bump?
The revenue bump?
Yeah,
or-
what, was it like a percent? I
Well,
mean,
no, I don't know the exact percentage from going from just having a San Francisco flight to adding LAX. I would assume that we doubled it only because of the two, they serve different populations. Different customers go to each airport for a different use.
What's the percentage that you're increasing again, no chart. So what's the actuals, like what are you projecting
we
it's
could-
going to be?
Yeah, I mean, I'll turn it to Andy. He probably knows those employment and deployment numbers better and see what he has to offer on those.
Do you want me to address your question first? Or
If it's
just
in
go
here,
through the
he just
information?
made this statement, so that's why I'll forget, because you're gonna start talking about great things and I'm gonna forget and be distracted. And so
I'll try to
just,
address that,
before we
though.
get into that, I'm just curious, what type of bump are you? There's not, a chart to show previous years or actuals or last year's or any of that to
Right,
know
I
what
can talk
type of
about that.
increase are you thinking?
Yep, I'll talk about it just along the way if that's okay.
Sure.
Thank you so much. Mayor, City Council, staff members, and the community, I'm Andrew Solzig, the airport's manager. It's my pleasure to present the airport budget. Special thanks to our staff who worked very diligently in preparing the budget, as well as the help from Steve and the finance department and other folks. I just want to begin that this is my first budget cycle. I'm still learning a lot. But with the goal of trying to balance the budget, or in making the balanced budget, we sort of had to take a zero-based budget process on this. And so there's a lot of things that we had to cut and then really get detailed onto the revenue projections and sharpen that pencil. So do I just press this button?
Should be a clicker.
Was it? Oh, just the clicker?
Yeah.
Okay. There we go. So having witnessed now some of the previous presentations, I know how to make this, the information, I guess, moving forward, not on what I have tonight, but moving forward, know what to present and make it a little more flashy. I like that. I like some of the images people had. So again, learning process for me, but I was just basing the presentation on what had previously been done and kind of worked from there, so bear with me. With a lot of effort sharpening the pencil, we were able to balance the budget. This is the long-term forecast, 10-year. First 2 years are based on actual revenues of what we've determined or anticipated, and then as well as the expenses. So we were able to balance it for year 2026. Whereas we use the assumption of a 4% increase on fees moving forward and a 3% increase on expenses. And so that's what you see on the chart there. Breaking down the revenues a little bit, we use historical data to make these assumptions for the next fiscal cycle. This is a breakout of where our revenues are collected from bottom to top. We have concessions, leases and rentals, aeronautical, fuel flowage, and then the orange at the very top, we'd show a little blip, which is anticipated sale of a parcel of land anticipated in 2027, but gives you a general idea of the breakout for our revenue projections. Master fee schedule changes. These, we are putting in some requests to increase certain fees. While the Airports Division has kept our user fees low over past years, we really need to, in order to catch up with our expenses, we're going to need to make some increases in our revenues. And so we've identified some key areas where we need to make these adjustments, including base rates for tie-down rentals and overnight aircraft, landing fee increases, fuel flowage, possibly a fuel flowage increase. Right now, we're at 10 cents per gallon. We may consider an increase of 1 cent. Passenger, the parking lot daily rate would increase from $10 per night to $12 per night. We help justify that by doing the parking lot project. Having a new parking lot facility gives us some means or justification behind why we're making the increase. Plus, we have a loan behind that that we'll have to pay for. And then our security badging program, we made some adjustments there as well. We tried to clean up our rates and fees just to make more sense with moving forward, because we had a lot of costs that were really broken out in way too much detail, and we could simplify that, and we tried to do that. So we will continue to monitor the performance of the fee changes and consider additional updates each year. That's just something we're going to have to evaluate. So this gives you a chart of the acreage. Bear with me a second. In total, RDD has 1,584 acres, whereas Benton has 158 acres for a total of 1,742 acres of land that we control. In that, RDD has over 240 licenses and leases that we need to maintain, and over 150 at Benton. So we have a lot of licenses and leases to keep track of on an annual basis. So the aeronautical development areas are highlighted in green, non-aeronautical is in red. A lot of the red currently is in farming, but that can be for future development as needed. And then we are looking at working with, or doing an RFP for software services, and that highlights the bullet of updated aircraft tracking and billing processes. This will help us keep track of those aircraft that are landing and bill them accordingly, because we know that there is a small percentage that is missed today, and we hope to collect those in the future. And then we already talked about the parking lot improvements in the facility. So one of the charts I wanted to show you was the breakout. Approximately 40% of our budget goes toward personnel and cross charges. 34% goes to O&M, and then the remaining percentage goes to fixed charges, capital outlay, debt service, and net transfers. So it gives you just a general breakout of what our budget, or how, yeah, just a general breakout of our budget. Any questions on that one? I thought maybe there might be. Not this time? Okay. So capital projects, we have our major runway project coming up. So this shows you the breakout of how that is funded. Majority of it is federally funded. And then our local share of 1.7 million will be covered through passenger facility charges. So no local funds will be needed for this project. And then the FAA will have discretionary money of 21.7 million. So 100% funded for that. The $1.5 million parking lot project, we're looking at a 10-year loan from the city with annual payments approximately little over $132,000, and with a balloon payment at the end of the 10 years, at which time, if we have the funds to make that balloon payment, we will, or we could consider refinancing. For Benton Field, we have a design project for East Side Taxi Lane, and this is just the pavement services as well as drainage between 4 rows of hangars. And again, that's going to be funded mainly through federal funds. This is just the design portion. So, and then we anticipate in a couple of years, the actual construction would take place. So this is just to get things started on that. And then for the year beyond, we're looking at more design work for runway safety areas, of which majority of that's federally funded. And then looking at Benton, we do have a power line project that we're looking into, just putting that underground, and then security fencing upgrades. So those are the capital projects. We did take out all of our capital purchase requests from this budget just because we just don't have the funds for it. These could include some of the items that we had listed or wanted to get would be snowplow attachment, forklift replacement, and tractor attachments. We just couldn't make that happen on this time. And then for Benton, replacing a gate and the mechanism associated with it for security purposes.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
What happens then in the event of it snowing out there? Not that it snows a whole lot here, so I
We do
understand,
have
but-
two trucks with snowplow attachments. We would love to have a third.
Okay.
Just means being able to remove snow quicker.
Okay, okay.
As far as capital needs, we already talked about the parking lot, the west side taxi lanes. I previously talked about the east side taxi lanes. Now we're looking at, this would be the west side, which we just don't have funding for. This would be the pavement has failed in certain areas and needs to be full replacement. And we're talking in the hundreds of thousands of dollars to do that. And we just don't have the funds for it. And then security cameras, our security system in general is at its useful life. Things are starting to fail. They need to be replaced. We're already using this year's funds to replace certain mechanisms with access needs, but then our security cameras are in need for replacement as well. And that's just something where we hope they will hold on as long as they can until we can budget for it, but something that we just need to plan for and prepare for. As far as development needs, we're constantly issuing requests for proposals for future development. We do have a lot of land, as you saw in a previous chart, that's available. We want to work with our economic development group to find potential uses for that, and that will come in the coming years. And then something to consider that we want to approach the car rentals about would be implementing a customer facility charge. Similar to a passenger facility charge on an airline ticket, it would be, so if you rented a car, a few dollars would go toward helping the airport to pay for car rental needs, for example, a car wash facility or any improvements that they need for their operation. And then looking at O&M, we have, we cut it down to the bare minimum, basically even with what we have this year, although we have identified a higher need. And that's really it, but be happy to answer any of your questions.
As far as the rental car, the fees, is that regards to what we discussed in our budget meetings in January and February? We talked about adding I think it was a tax to rent a cars, or is that the same thing, or is that something different?
That is the same thing,
It is, okay.
yes. And how that would work is we would need to approach the car rental saying we want to implement it for these reasons, and then get their approval, and then we could put it into our rates and charges.
It has to be used for specific things. So it can't be used for general maintenance needs. It has to be related to the car rental facilities or business of renting cars.
Where are there opportunities to make more revenue at the airport? Lands, like what's the long-term sort of goal?
Well,
plan?
we are excited about some new developments coming up. That includes Air Shasta wanting to build a new large hangar to expand their business. Reading Jet Center is about to start a project in June for their fueling facilities, so that's going to be additional leased land. And then Yurok Tribe wants to build another hangar as well. So additional leases is what's going to bring in more revenue. And then just identifying other areas on the property that we can look for further development. There's a lot of interest for hangars, but we only have one identified area on the property that we can consider doing that. But again, it's a high cost to the developer because they're going to have to build taxi lanes and the pavements in between, all of that. So in time, I think that will come. And then
Where in this, are there possibilities for more hangars in the greens?
in the northeast, right now it's highlighted red, but it'd be basically, so north is you're to the left on this map. And so be basically northwest of where the racetrack is. Right now, we have Reach that's located over there, and another facility, I can't remember what the use is for that,
You got a
but
pointer?
we have, does this have a pointer? I don't know if this. There we go. Okay, so basically in this area, right here.
That's where you can develop more
Or-
hangars?
We could,
But
yes.
The issue is asphalt or concrete?
So, I mean, they'd have to build the hangar and the, asphalt to, because there's no federal funds or anything to build that, and since it's for private use, technically, they have to be the ones that pay for that.
Is there any thought about if we're gonna have concrete being created right on site and we're gonna, what would be the additional cost to add some infrastructure there to actually, would that offset the cost and actually help us make more money by investing and putting some concrete down since the concrete mixer is gonna be there in a couple months?
So in relation to the runway project, the timing just wouldn't work out. There are we're probably talking 2 years out before they could even consider constructing on any hangar development. Between the environmental with the Federal Aviation Administration and the other processes that we need to go through, it's going to take that long.
Okay, so that's a 2-year, if we wanted to do that, it's
Right.
2 years before you could ever even
Yeah.
get to that?
Right.
With
So
approvals included?
hopefully in the next budget cycle. But we have looked at every nook and cranny to find the revenues and decrease our expenses as much as possible, and that's how we got to balanced budget.
I have a question about, so sorry. I have a question. We currently have we have a contractor, a vendor who monitors the parking lot, correct?
Correct.
And is that contract comes up for reconsideration next year?
It comes up soon because we just issued the request for proposal yesterday.
Okay. Is that, I haven't looked at that in a while. Is that potentially somewhere making that system more efficient or modernized or something like that, a potential way for us to increase some funding?
Yes, that's a great question. We plan on implementing license plate recognition technology. So we're putting in cameras so that we can keep track of the vehicles that come and go. And then they can verify, the management company that will end up getting it, they can verify it with what they've collected. And so it's just going to be more accurate, similar to what the software that we're looking at for aircraft landings. So getting landing fees and overnight aircraft and charging them. So we'll have two processes in place so that we can really keep track and catch those that we need to have paid.
Yeah, I feel like there's
makes sense.
probably some potential missed revenue there, so I think
Right.
that's great that you're looking at that. Thank you.
This loan thing's gonna come back in the council meeting. Will you have better numbers for us to know how you'd actually pay us back for what the actuals were for the last couple of years?
For the parking lot loan?
Yeah.
We're planning on paying for that strictly out of parking revenues. We believe that the $2 increase from the parking based
that.
on historical car, vehicle overnights, that, and then with the increase in Denver, we did a conservative increase. They'll be able to pay for the annual loan payment.
Will we be able to get more spaces, or are you gonna keep the same amount of spaces when you
Unfortunately, the parking lot was designed as just to replace existing, but it'll be more efficient. So we won't be adding, well, I guess.
I'm just wondering
I
for
believe
striping.
they are adding some more spaces, but it's in the same footprint.
Same footprint, but I mean, are we changing the schematic so we can get more cars in there?
I believe so.
Okay. Thanks.
And we'll bring that item back on June 3rd, the loan, the parking
not in
lot
this
loan.
one?
No, we're going to be pulling that item this
Okay.
evening. So we're changing some of the funding source and then a fiscal impact on that. So we'll bring it back on June 3rd.
Okay, you heard it here.
If there's nothing else, I'll make a motion that we accept and move, encourage staff to move this direction.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. You're still absent.
It's not setting it up.
You can't adjourn if you're not here.
Go to topic vote. Go to topic vote. On the, yes. We got it.
Yeah, well, I just would wrap up with just the next steps is we'll take all this information and then we will begin the tedious work of loading this all into the budget documents, finish off loading into the system, and so that we can present to you the full draft final budget on June 17th.
So we're not gonna get that budget before? we
You'll
can-
get it as soon as we can release that to you, so it's probably, we usually shoot for at least a week to 10 days in advance, but we're a little later this year, so we'll work and endeavor to get it to you as soon as we possibly can.
So the chances are we could not get that budget workshop, or that budget book until the Thursday before to vote
No,
on.
we will beat that deadline. I just can't promise you exactly when it's going to be right now because we just are starting the final process because this meeting took place a little later than normal. And so we're running a little late.
We are adjourned. Back at 5:15.